Oh, goodness. Welcome to Yada Yahowah Radio. If you hear my co-hosts chattering this evening, you get maybe one word out at a time. Mm-hmm. It's because they're very cold. I guess the U.S. has been hit with a cyclone bomb, and from Seattle to Boston, the temperatures are in the low teens all the way down to -10 in places of the country. Dave, you said it's supposed to get down to 15 degrees, and you live in northern Florida. And, of course, you picked the icebox of California to move to, Kirk. We can't feel sorry for you.
You're so kind.
It is chilly here tonight. We're going to drop down to a low of 73 this evening.
You poor guy.
Yeah, and the high today was only 83. So a 10-degree swing for us. That's pretty scary. Went out to dinner tonight.
Near 73. I fear for you.
Yeah, no, all the way down to 73. This is the coldest time of the year here, and it is. We have to turn on the pool heater because we can't handle 80 degree water. It is. We're making fun, but I actually think that there is a considerable truth associated with where I just ended up. I spend still 10, 12 hours a day translating and writing, but to pick a better spot would, I think, could be impossible. It's just so idyllic here in terms of the beauty and the weather, but it's also so remote from the travesty that is infecting the United States economically, morally, judicially, in virtually every way. That you just feel like you're a little bit isolated out here, and being isolated at a time like this is a pretty good idea, to tell you the truth.
Agreed.
I'm just going to have a very brief summation of what the past week has brought. It's pretty obvious from the previous shows that I'm currently translating Ezekiel. Turned out to be the worst false prophet maybe ever. And I've spent a lot of time. I've written 4 volumes on completely excoriating Paul's credibility and Christianity with it, destroying the credibility of Christianity and the Christian New Testament and Paul's writings, to the point that no one who has ever read the 4 volumes of Questioning Paul has remained a Christian. And the book that I wrote, which is maybe one of the best most read books in the world now on Islam, Prophet of Doom, which uses the words of Muhammad to disprove Islam, the Quran, and Allah, is also an extremely effective tool at disproving religion. But Ezekiel is a different beast entirely. The Quran is an isolated thing. You can just say, all right, I'm going to look at Muhammad's words in the Quran and Hadith and demonstrate that he was full of it. You can isolate Paul's pathetic 14 letters. They're exceedingly easy to disprove. You can pinpoint his influence on the Christian New Testament, and it's contained and exceedingly easy to disprove. Ezekiel's exceedingly easy to disprove. There's nothing in it that's accurate. I mean, it's just one lie after another. Exceedingly poorly written and clearly demonic in its overtones. But the difference with Ezekiel is it's been placed right between legitimate prophets.
Yeah.
And 3 religions adore it. Mm-hmm. And so to take it on is a whole different kettle of fish. And this week's trauma was that a couple of weeks ago, I finished translating and commenting on, I thought I'd finished translating and commenting on the 16th chapter of Ezekiel, which is pornographic. It's misogynist. It has it shows that the covenant, the original covenant, was the product of rape, where Yahweh forced Abraham to rape Sarah. I mean, if it was true, that's what it says. Fortunately, it's not true.
Right.
And then Satan, who is the Lord of Babel, the voice of Ezekiel, talks about taking Jewish women and just as they enter puberty, and having his way with them. It's vulgar, and it's far worse than just Satan claiming that he impregnates Jewish women and they have his children. He has them slaughter them and butcher them, and then he has the women sliced and diced and burned and stoned, and it's revolting. And it's tough to take because it is so graphic and so disgusting and so sadistic that it's tough to take, and particularly if you are a woman and have grown up in a rather sheltered environment. Say if you've grown up in a religious environment prior to coming to engage in the covenant, and you haven't had the exposure to the raw edge of sadistic humanity. It's tough to take, and yet it is. If there ever was a chapter that needs to be taken on literally, it's this one, because it is the basis for religious oppression of women. Satan dehumanizes them. He objectifies them. He is the one who perpetrates greater crimes against them than have Christians, Jews, and Muslims. So it's a tale that needs to be told, because the end result is that women can be liberated from the oppression of religion, and they can heal as a result of knowing how Satan influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to torment them. And best of all, we can hold the religious accountable for perpetrating this horrible crime. So it's one of those things that is as bad as, in fact, worse than you can possibly imagine, and yet exceedingly valuable and good, because of what we can do to help the oppressed, who have been tormented by this book for 2,500 years. So anyway, it was so strongly received by different members of our family as they were reading this thing for the first time. And, I'm pretty callous. I'm relentlessly rational. I'm going to tell you exactly what the words mean. I don't pull any punches, and for me, you just go through them at Joe and you say, this is what it means. But for women, it's a different story. Either those who have been abused by it and are seeing their abuser face to face, or those who have never been subjected to it and are seeing the crudeness of it, and it's offensive. So it was quite the experience to go through it, and to see various people's reaction to it, and the way that I had to rework it to make it effective. Because Ezekiel is so asinine from beginning to end. I have chosen to use the Elia approach, which is sarcasm. But when you get into something as lewd and grotesque as Satan's dehumanizing of women in Ezekiel 16, sarcasm just doesn't work. But you can't tone it down either. And so I replaced the sarcasm by just a relentless pursuit of the truth. explaining and justifying every conclusion so that it was bold and blunt and irrefutable, because I sense that we're at war.
Yeah.
And we're at war. I think one of the things I wrote down in the chapter is it's like if you were walking by and you saw a bunch of religious zealots justifying their rape of a little girl. Yeah. And what would you do? Are you going to try to stop it? Are you going to try to explain to the men that what they're doing is wrong? Are you going to stand up for the girl? Or are you just going to walk away because it's really uncomfortable and nasty? Or we at least stay there long enough to be a witness so that should the girl survive, you can at least hold the perpetrators accountable and do her that justice. What are you going to do? And that ultimately becomes the decision that everybody has to make as we confront Ezekiel 16. What are you going to do? Are you going to join me and be a witness? Will you go one step further and join me and be part of the chorus, exposing and condemning this and standing up for the victim, which are religious women worldwide? Mm-hmm. Billions of them. What are you going to do? Just because it is vulgar and uncomfortable. And so it's really, it was an amazing experience that we all had as we grew through this and tried to come up with the right tone, the right words for something exceptionally uncomfortable. Anyway, my hope is I'm now about a third of the way through the 7th chapter of the 2nd volume of a series we're calling Babel. The 2 volumes of Babel will be Daniel, which is already written and published, and then the second one on Ezekiel. And I think we'll end up posting this on the website before the volume is done and to try to share it because there's a lot at stake. And what we have found is unequivocal. Ezekiel is not inspired by God. It is inspired by the devil himself. And it is blatantly obvious. It is irrefutable. But it does mean a lot of things. It means there is no Magog war. It means there is no millennial temple the way it's described in that book. It means that the depictions of God and his multiple chariot wheels and riding around with the 4 beasts is not true. And it also means that God's attack on women is invalidated. So anyway, that's where we are in our translations. We hope to get to that. I can tell you when I read the final revision of this chapter, it's chapter 5 of the 2nd volume of Babel. It's not posted anywhere yet, but I think that Dee and the social media team will probably post excerpts of that chapter so people will have a chance to read it. We do want to make it available because it is written in defense of women worldwide. It's going to be interesting to see people's reaction to it. And hopefully, I think, in fact, almost certainly, it will be received in extremes. The religious will do everything they can to condemn me, since they won't have an argument against the translations or the conclusions. And those who have been abused by religion will feel a sense of freedom for the first time of their lives. A hand out to lift them away from this, a time to heal, and someone to stand with them and condemn this vile monster. So it is an interesting voyage we have been on. Prior to that, I had thought that the most aggressive assault marshaled among the prophets at Judaism in particular was found in the book of Hosea. And we just concluded the second chapter of Hosea in our program last week. And I still think that the book of Hosea is the most informative for Jews that are questioning their religion. If you're not questioning your religion, it just go away. There's nothing anyone can do to help you. You are impervious to evidence and reason, and even the testimony of God himself won't matter to you. So we're not speaking to you. For those that are conspiratorial, you have no means even now of processing the truth or understanding it. You are a joke apart from your own little support group that tells you what you want to hear. And the overtly political, whether they be conservatives or progressives, once again, they isolate everything that isn't supportive of what they believe to be true. But there is a significant group out there who are questioning their politics, trying to walk away from them, who are questioning their religion, trying to or already have walked away from it. And the words of Hosea should resonate with you. Yahweh's universal disdain for mankind's most prevalent institutions, in particular religion. Not only the single most repeated theme throughout his testimony, but also the least understood. With few exceptions, and for relatively short periods of time, God and his people have been estranged for the past 4,000 years for a singular reason. Humankind wants to be religious, and God hates religion. Well, that is an exceedingly surprising conclusion for all but the covenant family, covenant members, those who are Torah observant. If you're a Torah observant, you know goddamn religion. But if you're not, you have been beguiled into believing that the God of the quote-unquote Old Testament is exceedingly religious, and you have to obey his religion, or you are sent off to hell. But the truth is, the God who inspired the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, his name is Yahweh, is exceedingly and overwhelmingly anti-religion. And not just some religions. He despises Christianity, Islam, and he is antagonistic towards human governmental schemes, whether they be democracy or communism or socialism and most economic schemes, particularly the caste system and slavery. God is the ultimate libertarian. He wants everyone to be free to choose to know him, to manage their lives as they see fit. Now, addressing the empire that is most synonymous with institutionalizing religion and integrating it into their culture and government, it's Babylon. Like when we speak of Ezekiel and Daniel, the two books that make up this volume, both were written in Babylon. The Jewish Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian effect is exceedingly negative. And that's why when Yahweh introduces himself to Abraham, we find Abraham has already begun walking away from Ur of the Chaldeans, which was in the southern part of what became Babylon. And the fact that he is walking away makes it possible for Yahweh to invite him to be part of his family. Until you begin the process of walking away from religion, God is unknowable. He's unapproachable. It's the first condition of the covenant. Walk away from your country. And in particular, Babylon, which is the birthplace of institutionalized religion and its integration into politics. Mitzrayim is also an example of something Yahweh wants us to walk away from. Mitzrayim means the crucible of religious and political oppression. It's why Yahweh liberated his people from this place. Etched in stone. Speaks of Yahweh as a liberator, as one who brought his people out of and away from human oppression. The second statement is entirely anti-religious from beginning to end, with God encouraging us to avoid every permeation of religion because of what it does to our lives, corrupting us and precluding us from engaging in a relationship with him. The very institution that claims that it leads to God and leads to eternal life with God is the very institution that is the greatest inhibitor of forming a relationship with God. Now, when we move from the tablets to the invitations, particularly Pesach and Matzah, they were conceived and fulfilled to resolve the life-threatening and the infectious nature of religion and politics. The separation of God's people from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, began with Pesach and Matzah. They're going to die, you're going to live. Pesach. Matzah, they're infected with religion. I'm cleansing it from you so that when you leave, you're not carrying it with you on your way to the promised land. And of course, the next fulfillment we're looking forward to with great anticipation is Kippurim, the day of reconciliations, when Yahweh and his family, Israel, are reunited again. We spent considerable time discussing, because it was brought up in Hosea 2, the story of what happened in the Jezreel Valley. It's the epitome of religion gone wrong. Not that it ever goes right. And we learned about how Eliah responded to the prophets of Asherah and Baal. But even with the death of the lords, Baal's priests, the lure of religion would captivate the people, and it ultimately necessitated the divorce so vividly portrayed throughout Hosea. This long intermission of 2,700 years. Now, continuing to use the infidelity of adultery. He's not talking about a husband or wife cheating on their spouse. I know it sounds crazy, and it's something that people have a tough time with, but when God speaks of adultery, even the statement that he etched in stone, it has nothing to do with a monogamous marriage. God doesn't care if you have one spouse, two spouse, five spouse, 10 spouse. It doesn't matter. He says nothing about premarital sex or any kind of sensual experience outside of marriage. In fact, there really is no definition of marriage. And rather than divorce being, oh boy, God's going to get you for that, God says, if you're not happy with who you are, write him a letter and go on your way. God's not a prude. He doesn't want you to engage in a sexual relationship that takes advantage of someone or that is just perverted, that's harmful. Incest is exceedingly harmful. It'll ruin a child for the rest of their lives. It's exceedingly harmful. God said don't do that. Rape, exceedingly harmful. Don't do that. Bestiality, it's actually disgusting for the animal. Don't do that. Don't do mommy and daddy. Don't do brother and sister. Don't do your children. Don't do beasties. Don't rape. Don't do that kind of stuff. And because it was so prevalent during the ancient times that, particularly in battles, that the victorious side would sodomize the losing side. God said, if a man is down, don't take advantage of it.
Yeah.
It's perverted. Don't do that. But other than that, God really doesn't care. In fact, I was writing this chapter, and this will sound shocking to many people, but I felt the need to say it. If I were to ask you, what is the sign of the covenant, what would you answer?
I would have said the upright support, the pillar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
the way that.
it is circumcision, but after you clip that little tip off, what's left? Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you think that God has a hang-up on sexuality? No.
No.
No, he says, I invented this thing, and I know you're going to have fun with it. So, no, God is not a prude. He's just not. And, the very identification of the sign of the covenant, it has a serious side to it. It is the means that we use to demonstrate our love and to conceive children, and demonstrating our love and conceiving children is all part and parcel of the covenant. But God wanted to make sure we'd have fun doing it. He is a fun-loving guy. There's no question about it. So, anyway, when he talks about adultery, which is the prevalent theme throughout Hosea, he's not talking about sexuality. He's talking about when his people have affairs with false gods.
Right.
Yahowah. And it's Yahowah. For those who are the first-time listeners, Yahowah's name is exceedingly easy to pronounce. It's comprised of four vowels, one of which is repeated, Yod, Hey, Wah, Hey. The Y is pronounced like the Y in English. In English, it is a consonant vowel. The Y is. The Hey is pronounced as an Ah. Haya is the verb that Yahowah used to identify himself. You find the Ah sound from a Hey at the end of the word Torah. The Wah is also explained in Torah. You get the O sound in Torah from a Wah. The Shalom, which is constantly repeated among Jews, the O sound in Shalom comes from a Wah. Those are the letters. Yod, Hey, Wah, Hey. Yah, O, Wah. Said to me, go out again and choose to love a woman who is amorous with, devoted to, and passionate about an evil neighbor and a moral fellow countryman, a loudmouth friend, and an undesirable companion. Ra. Ra is all the raw words, including ra, so in telling in Hebrew, and that we want to translate just ra as neighbor, but that's like saying that you're conveying 1% of what it means. Wicked, no good, improper, immoral, unethical, irrational, countryman, neighbor, friend, associate. I'm unwilling to just say an amorous woman who is devoted to and passionate about one of those things, because it's all of those things. And it's interesting that Ra'ah also means shepherd. And so it is misleading and wicked shepherds as well. Who is an unfaithful adulteress involved in religious worship. Wa na'af. She is an idolatrous whore. Similar to the way Yahowah loves and desires to be with the children of Israel when they turn to the presence of other different and additional gods. And because that's a lot of information for one statement, that's Hosea Hebrew text 3:1. The interesting thing about Yahowah, and I brought this up because of the criticisms that were leveled at and by the way, I like criticisms because when you see them, you say, okay, it's not going to be just one person. Many people are going to see it this way. It gives you a chance to refine the craft and make sure you have a better product in the end. But one of the things you become very obvious about is that Yahweh is not interested in working with perfect people. If Yahweh wanted to find a perfect messenger, he wouldn't need a messenger at all. First of all, he wouldn't find any candidates that they're hard enough to find as it is, but they would serve no purpose. If Yahweh wanted to create a perfect message, he conveyed himself. He doesn't want to convey a perfect message. So that's really hard to understand, I'm sure, for most people. That's not what he wants to do. He chooses people like Moshe and Dod and Yashaya and Yirmiah and Eliah because they're flawed, because they're real, because they've succeeded and they have failed and they've gotten up again. God wants to filter what he has to say to us such that it resonates with us and it's real. And the only way to do that is to convey it through flawed, dented individuals who've had hard knocks. It's never more true than it is with Hosea. And God said, Hosea, I want you to have some empathy with my situation. I want you to be able to not just make this testimony right, but to keep it real. And the best way for that to happen is for you to go off and find a temple prostitute and then raise children of this temple prostitute. Then you'll have some idea what I'm dealing with the children of Israel.
That's tough.
So that's what he's talking about here. I know that's a stretch for most people to understand that God would want that kind of empathy, or that God would want that kind of realism. People are saying, but you're pretty egotistical to claim that God calls you to do this and has inspired you to write, translate, and write these books. You evidently aren't familiar with the people that God chooses to work with. If you were, you'd know it's not a compliment. We're all flawed. Because he wants it to be real in addition to right. So he tells Hosea, go out again and choose a woman who is amorous with and devoted to, passionate about your neighbors, your moral associates, countrymen, loudmouth friends, the undesirable company. She's just all over the place, and she's got absolutely no filter as to no sense of judgment. She'll do anybody. Pick somebody faithful, adulterous, involved in religious worship. Len and I were talking about at dinner what the risk is when a person marries somebody that is religious. Look what happened to Solomon. He and everyone else lost the United Kingdom of Israel because he went off and married religious women. Bad choice. Terrible consequence. Look what happened with Israel when Ahab married Jezebel. A religious, is she from Tyre or somewhere up there in Phoenicia? Lebanon, which is Lebanon today. Phoenicia back in the day. Look what happened. Israel was destroyed. So this is what God is asking. I want you to identify with what I'm up against. And then he explains that this unfaithful adulteress is really turning to the presence of other different and additional gods. Wahem, Pane, Elohim, Akar. And they become the lovers of compressed raisin cakes. The innuendo there is that these raisin cakes were part of, in particular, son of the Son. The Son of God was always conceived on Easter. Of course, he'd be born 9 months later during the winter solstice as the days began to grow longer. In fact, we're just a couple of days from approaching, which my adorable wife likes to call Shitmas, the holiday of Christians, where they have a baby God and their God comes into the world. He's born as a baby, and their God is so small that he will fill that little baby. That's the size of their God. And although he grows into a full-size man, that's still not a very big God. It's not a very good God because, he gets killed. But nonetheless, that's the story, and they're going with it. So, loving someone who adores us in return, greatest of life's rewards. Nothing's better. Endure unrequited love for most of the past 4,000 years. So let's be clear. God has no interest in our sexual relations. Therefore, he does not feel cheated when we are affectionate or amorous with another person. He has no stated preference for monogamy over polygamy. Well, disgusting. This is not about Abraham offering to share Sarah with kings to increase his status among men. More to the point, since Dod is Yahweh's most beloved, his preference for 18 women, 8 wives, 10 concubines rather than one, had no bearing on God's perception of him, and he was never called an adulterer. So God is not addressing sex, but instead using adultery to explain his overriding issue with his people, desire to be devoted to the children of Israel when they turn to the presence of other different and additional gods. Turning to other gods is the result of religion. Period. With gods, you can have one or many. But with God, capital G, the one named Yahweh, there can be only one. This known if Shem would just be H-Shem. Right? Why did he write Elohim instead of just What? Why replace Yahweh with Adonai? With DN when it wouldn't that require doing so if we're going to be consistent? Now, since Hosea is a prophetic book, when we apply Yahweh's eternal truth to this day, so to his promised return to resolve this problem, it is impossible not to recognize Judaism as the current impediment to reconciliation. Rather than rabbis being the arbitrators of God's intent, they are frustrating it. So up to this point, Hosea has said very little, and Yahweh has conveyed a great deal about Israel's religious addiction. So I bartered, and I bought her for myself with 15 silver coins and as much barley as a pair of donkeys could carry. So I just love the raw nature of this whole thing. So I went out and bought her. Okay, well, if you're going to find God says, I want you to go find a whore. Okay. I went out and bought her. Cash. So, yeah, there you go. So I said to her, you can continue to live with me for a very long time. Okay, so he did buy her, but he was a gentleman. He says, listen, I know this is the transaction. I've been asked to do this by God, but between you and me, I'm a good guy. I'm going to treat you right, and from my perspective, we can be together for a long time. I'm not going to use you and toss you to the curb. You will no longer have to be a prostitute. and to be demeaned, and you will not have to be with a man. So then, this is how I will be with you. He's even telling her, listen, I bought you fair and square. The donkeys are proof. but I'm not here to rape you. I brought you fair and square, but I'm going to tell you, you can live with me as long as you'd like. And you not only don't have to be a prostitute. I didn't buy you to pimp you out. I didn't buy you to control you as if you were my prostitute. I'm telling you, you not only don't have to be a prostitute anymore, but you don't even have to be with a man. So this is how. That's
very generous, considering.
Yeah. So he says, listen, I understand this. God wanted me to do so I could be an effective witness, but between you and me, you have free will. And you can use that free will to make your own decisions. I mean, that really is an extraordinary response, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what he basically figured out, listen, if God really wants me to have children through her, then it's all going to work out. And I'm not going to feel like a creep. And she's going to be fun to be around and enjoyable to be around because, well, quite frankly, I liberated her. And one of the things that's really interesting is that today, because of drugs and sex trafficking, the young girls that are used as prostitutes are usually very poorly educated. They're drugged out of their mind, and it is not a very it's probably the least respected profession. That was not the case back then. And the prostitutes were often very well educated. Part of the process was being able to be an intelligent dinner companion. And what's also interesting is that back in that day and through every culture, it's the wives that had absolutely no freedom.
Yeah.
They could seldom go out of the house. They had no autonomy of any kind. And so the prostitute was actually freer, better educated than the wife.
More like an Ishah?
But it is a very, very different kind of a world than we know today. But nonetheless, Hosea is he's an honorable man. And I think he, as Yahweh's prophet, he approached it just like Yahweh would. What I am doing is I'm buying your freedom. I am not buying sex from you. I'm buying your freedom.
Right.
So, quite a story just in the story. For by comparison, the children of Yisrael shall abide for a long time without a counselor or king, without a patron or leader, without the ability to prepare a sacrifice, without an upright stone pillar or memorial, without the linen vestment to adorn the priest, or someone to heal them of the familial god and religious idolatry. Hosea 3:4. So it's beyond that Hosea is demonstrating God's nature. I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to ransom you from a life where men are having their way with you. But your life and my life are going to be symbolic. Because just as I'm offering you the opportunity to live with me for a long time, Israel is just going to abide for a long time. But Israel's not going to have a counselor or king. From about 450 BCE to today, there hasn't been another prophet. That's a long intermission.
Yeah.
I mean, no counselor, no king. Israel hasn't had a king from about, Israel actually hasn't had a king from, 700 BCE. Yahowah hasn't had a king from, 400 BCE. you're not going to have a counselor, you won't have a king. Not going to have a patron or leader. This is Sar. I would render Sar now as a advocate for the king. Without the ability to prepare a sacrifice, there'll be really no priests. And the priests are necessary because God wants his Moed Mikre celebrated in a way that everything is symbolic. And so the priests not only prepare the meal, but they also explain what's going on. And, really from the Maccabean period where the fight was allegedly over not being Hellenized, the fight was really over who's going to be in charge. Is it going to be the rabbis? They didn't call themselves that at the time, but anybody who aspired to a position of the priesthood, or is it just going to be the Levites as Yahowah had instructed? And also with the Levites, they couldn't own land or develop any kind of wealth, and the priesthood was going to be a very, very lucrative occupation. And so that's in the period of the 4th century BCE, and, well, it's been that way ever since. Yeah. Without the linen vestment to adorn a priest, the next time we're going to see the linen vestment that adorns a high priest, the ephod, worn properly, it's going to be on Dowd.
Yeah.
David, when he returns on Yom Kippurim with Yahweh, the returning Messiah, is also going to be in the role of high priest. He is the one who's going to anoint the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, the Kipporeth, on that day, so that Yahweh's return and the reconciliation of his family is done properly in accordance with the Torah. So he'll be the next one adorned in that way. And the purpose of that is to heal them. But and what they need to be healed of is their religious idolatry. Finally, during the last days, the children of Yisrael will return. That's the thing that I love about really all of the prophets. This is a recurring theme throughout Yeshua, Isaiah, through Yirmiyah, Jeremiah, through Zechariah, Malachi, Malachi, here in Hosea, is that, there's going to be a long time out. And it's a time out for religious behavior. But in the end, Yahweh is going to reconcile his relationship with Yisrael. First, Yahudem and Israelites are going to reconcile one to another, and then they will reconcile with Yahweh, coming to know him by name, acknowledging his name, accepting the terms and conditions of the covenant, attending the Moed Mikre as they were articulated and designed. At this point in time, the single best series of books to explain how that is to be done and to prepare oneself to be among the few who greet Yahweh on this day is Yada Yahowah. I wish there were 1,000 different other sites you could go to, but YadaYah.com is it.
Mm-hmm.
This is the place you should go if you want to get to know Yahweh, appreciate the terms and conditions of the covenant, understand what God is offering and expecting in return. And if you want to know how to properly celebrate each of the 7 Moed Mikre with him each year, if you want to learn how to pronounce his name, the importance of his name, and the very fact that there is one more Exodus to be celebrated, and that is out of what is modern-day Babylon, religiously, politically, geographically. Political Babylon is the United States, where about 40% of the Jewish population worldwide resides. Religious Babylon is the Roman Catholic Church, where many, many converso Jews still live. And geographic Babylon is the Middle East, all being called home to Israel. So eventually, during the last days, a car in the end, the children of Israel will return. They're going to change their attitude, and they will come back and be restored. It was written in the call perfect. Sometimes the stems and the conjugations are really important. This is one of those occasions. The call stem means this is genuine, this is authentic, this is actual, to be interpreted literally. It's a non-nuanced stem. All stems in Hebrew speak of the relationship between the subject-object relative to the action of the verb. The action of the verb here is to return, shub, and so it's the children of Israel. They are the subject. They're going to return, and the object here is to God, Yahweh. And that relationship exists then between Israel and Yahweh. The imperfect conjugation speaks of ongoing activity. And, you know, in the book of Ezekiel, where the writing is so remedial, I've just taken the perfect and imperfect and taken them down to the simplistic, the ultimate simplistic approach to them, which is that the perfect conveys a completed action, so it's easiest to convey it in the past. The imperfect conveys an ongoing action. It's ongoing, that it's either in the present or in the future.
Yeah.
It could have been in the past as well, but it is, if it's ongoing, it is present, and it will continue into the future. This was written in the imperfect, which means that there's an ongoing, unfolding consequence over time, and that the return is ongoing. They will seek, this is speaking of the children of Israel, they will seek and find Yahweh, their God, along with Dod, their king and counselor. Stunning. So, the last days, the children of Israel will return. The final Exodus. Put it on your bulletin board. The final Exodus. In the last days, the children of Israel will return. What are they going to return to? It's not a what.
Yahweh and God.
It's not a where. It's a who. Return to the God whose name they're afraid to say. And so if you are among those who are afraid to say Yahweh, you aren't going to be part of the group. You've excluded yourself. So you better learn how to say it, why it's written that way, who he is, why he's in love with his name, why he wants you to embrace his name. Because if you don't seek and find Yahweh, you have excluded yourself.
Yep.
Now, if you do not know that Yahweh is your God, then you are depriving yourself of the greatest truth in all of history. Now, Yahweh never works alone. Ever. He always, prime objective, is a form of relationship, and therefore he's always working through people. He conveyed his testimony through prophets, real people. He governs and leads them through people. And in all of human history, there are two people that Yahweh enjoyed working with the most. One was the most proficient. I think smartest, most articulate, best character, most consistently upright, Moshe. But his favorite person was a bit of a lovable rogue, David. That was his favorite person. And it gives us all enormous confidence. If Yahweh could say of Dod, he is my son, I am his father, I love him, he is right, he is vindicated, he's the guy that's returning with me, he is the King of Kings. if I was going to say that of Dode with all of the mistakes that man made in his life, then we're in really good place.
We're in high cotton, as they say.
Yeah, we are. There's room for us, even with our flaws. What this also means is that the Messiah is known. You ought not be wondering who the Messiah is going to be. The Son of God is Dode, David. It's not Jesus. The Messiah is Dode, David. Yahweh said so. Not Jesus. The one who is returning is Dode, David. Not Jesus. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One reason is that it's God's universe, and he liked this man's personality. He liked his character. He liked his attitude. He liked his courage. He was a Renaissance man. He a great lyricist, great singer, gifted writer, wonderful orator, tremendously courageous, passionate, intellectual. These are characteristics that God liked. God liked shepherds, too. God loved this man. And so he's returning with a man that he loves most. And for all eternity, the management of people, the shepherding of people, the counseling of people, God's going to handle through Dode. Doesn't mean we won't have direct access to God. We will. I was talking again to Leah during dinner tonight, and there's every indication that Yada was a bit of an introvert, in the sense that the difference between an introvert and an extrovert is that an introvert is comfortable around very close friends and enjoys deep and meaningful interactions and conversations with a limited number of people. But it has no issue occasionally being alone and then knowing they're going to engage again with somebody they're comfortable being around. An extrovert is charged by being in a larger group of people and finds people stimulating as opposed to draining. And so God, I think, would be very comfortable if Dode were the only one in eternity. To say the truth. That's just his nature, although he would tell us, just as he did with Adam, I'm going to give you a companion too, because I know you're still a social creature, and you need to have an alternative to me so that you're not totally dependent. But God's very comfortable with a limited number of people to be around. The more the merrier, but right. And Dode is his man. So if you don't like Dode, David, then you're not going to like eternity. And on the flip side of that is, if you want to know what God likes the most, what he's looking for in a human being, what he respects in a human, and what kind of characteristics cause a person to be effective with him, then read the Mizmor Psalms. Read what Samuel has to say of him. Read the Proverbs, the Mashal, which he wrote. And you will find what God loves. And you'll also see what frustrates him, because Dode's very real. Lots of flaws. He's kind of embodies Yisrael in a way. And they will come to show respect for me, even revere Yahweh for his beneficial qualities, his generosity and goodness among the remnant of the last days. Remnant's not a whole heck of a lot of people.
No.
There may be, 15 million Jews on the planet today? There won't be nearly that many by the time he returns. It's going to be a really rough go between now and then. And by the way, this date, if you're curious, October 2nd, 6:22 p.m., sunset in Jerusalem, October 2nd, 2033. That is year 6,000 Yah and the day of reconciliations, Yom Kippur. That is when he is going to return. So, now you know the date, right down to the minute, and you know who is returning, Yahweh. You know that the remnant of Israelites are going to be there with him, that your Messiah and King and Shepherd is going to arrive at the same time. It's David. You'll recognize him. And you will also know that of those who are part of that remnant and have returned to Yahweh, they all know his name. God has come up with an enormously generous plan. The benefits of the covenant are eternal life, perfection, adoption into Yahweh's family. He just happens to be God. That's a pretty good family to be adopted into. The enrichment and empowerment of your soul. And that enrichment and empowerment is extraordinary because we're going from three-dimensional beings stuck in time to seven-dimensional beings, with it being an infinite increase as we jump through those dimensions, with being essentially an energy-based, light-based being, unable to maneuver throughout the entire universe to explore it, and of course, as energy, live forever. And all of this is spoken of in the last days. So it's a story with a very happy ending. Any of the words in there, either Kirk or Dee, or other thoughts that you would like to toss in? Because from my perspective, Hosea 3:5 is about as good as it gets.
Oh yeah. If I may, Dee, what I do most of the time is I'll read the verses, and I'll have my inlet area and all my things up at the same time, and then I'll translate the words that confuse me or maybe I hadn't done for a long time, or just to get a clearer idea, reminders. And here are my notes on this one. I said this is three religious killers right off the top of the. Now, I don't read your commentary until I've done all my stuff to see if I'm reading the same way. And of course, the first one was, as we get close to that horrible December date, Yahweh's returning. He has a name. Yahweh's returning. He's coming with a Messiah named Dod, his son. So that wipes out Christmas. They're not in fear of him. They're in awe of him when he returns. So that's the nature that they're feeling now, not trembling in fear and bowing down and all the stuff that you hear. And then the third thing was quite interesting. I looked up a cherith, and with the verbal root being a char, and that is a small remnant, a small remaining group of people. By definition, it's the leftover piece of cloth, if you like, from the boat that's already been sold off. So we talk about a very small group. So once again, reinforcing so many of the concepts that we have, plus the fact that you mentioned earlier that Yahweh likes to work with people. Obviously, that's true. But to drive the point home, he's coming with Dod, and Dod, of course, is going to put the blood on the mercy seat. So, throw all your religion away. Yahweh tells you what he wants, what he's after, who he's after. And it's all, that little section probably took me all of about 15 minutes to look up everything just to make sure. And I think you even say a lot of this in your commentary, so I didn't want to steal your thunder. But it's I'm sorry, guys, it's there. Anybody can do this with a little bit of perspiration.
So, my experience has been from the very beginning, and 22 years ago, this was the first book that I attempted to translate. And it's been the same reaction over those 22 years. Hosea is the most mentally stimulating and also emotionally draining of the prophets. I'm not going to say that he's my favorite prophet. I have a favorite, Yeshaya. I have a very close and personal relationship with Yeshua. That might sound crazy to people, but we are buds. We work together. We are very supportive of one another. Yeshua had an enormous amount to say about the role that I'm playing and bringing his message back to his people so that it finally resonates with them. So he is my favorite prophet. The person that's bigger than life, it's Dode. And you know, from a style point of view, I'm enamored with Elia because I just love sarcasm. I think it's the most intelligent form of humor, and Elia had it in spades. So there's a lot of people it'd be interesting to know, but Hosea is just amazingly stimulating, but equally emotionally draining. It's a roller coaster. His message is unrelenting. It's like a fire hose that's full blast. And from the religious prostitutes to the infamous children, from Jezreel to the promised land, from the divorce to the reconciliation, from the Lord and the cadre of false gods to Yahweh. It's all there. That's why it's such an important book for Jews to appreciate and intellectual all at once. So in this particular statement, Israel is being compared to a high-priced religious whore. Kicked out of the bordello. And when you say whore, that's such a derogatory term today. And, you know, I'm not going to pretend that I was not going to be impressed with a temple prostitute, but it was
it's a professional
it was a
title.
higher calling than it is today. Let's just say. Anyway, she was bought and paid for. Now, she would be leaderless, however, as she now represents Israel. She'd be adrift, even though she'd been bought and paid for, ransom. She would nevertheless not remember who had saved her.
Yep.
Her priests and kings were gone. Her rabbis would replace the priests, while dictators of nations would rule over them instead of their counselors and kings. There'd be no way to reach them, no way to heal them from their religiosity. And such is the fate of all of those who believe false gods. But the story does not end that way. God's people, at least a remnant of them, will return in the end, the final Exodus. Israel's relationship with Yahweh will be restored, but not with Hashem, not with Adonai. They will change their approach to God, and in so doing, they will find it, and they will learn what is needed to recognize Yahweh as their God at long last. And the first thing they will have to do is to throw away those things which preclude them from seeing Him. The Talmud, the Mishnah, the Zohar, the Christian New Testament, the Quran. Recognizing that this was written centuries after Dode's passing, about 740-ish BCE. Dode was about 1000 BCE. So this was written centuries after Dode's passing. The realization that the surviving Israelites in the last days will acknowledge Dode as their king upon Yahweh's return, well, that's exhilarating. And yet, it is another affirmation that kingdom and the return of the Messiah, everybody has wrong.
Yeah.
Religious Jews say, oh, our Messiah is coming. They don't have a clue who it is. Not a clue. And Christians think that the Passover lamb, Yosha, whom they don't even know his name, that he is the Messiah, or they would call it the Christ, which means drugged in grease. How could you be that stupid? This says Dode is the one who is coming. Yahweh says 3 times, Dode, I anointed. He's my Messiah. I chose him. Yahweh says twice, Dode is my son, I am his father. You know how many times he says that of Jesus? 0. You know how many times Yahweh instructs people to anoint Jesus? 0.
No.
The fact is, the shepherd and the Passover lamb have different roles. Yosha is exceedingly important, but for none of the reasons that Christians ascribe to him. He is the Passover lamb. Dode is the Messiah. So God's people, at long last, a remnant of them, will return. Israel's relationship is restored. They will find God. They will recognize him at long last. This is another affirmation, as I've said, that so many in the religious community have it wrong. It means that Paul and Maimonides and Akiba, Muhammad, they were all wrong. It is Yahweh, not Hashem, nor Jesus, who is returning. And he is the one who is going to garner his people's respect. It's hard to believe now, as we're communicating in the deep freeze of the last days of 2022, just 11 years from this majestic return, that the time is fast approaching when Jews will value Yahweh above the rabbis, and they will find him to be of greater benefit than Judaism. You know, with the Likud partnership now forming a government of right-wing religious wackos in Israel, demonstrating for all to see the flaws of the parliamentary system, and these religious Jews trying to politicize their way to control Israel, to force the nation to fund their religiosity, to disallow anyone immigration into Israel who isn't in lockstep agreement with them. It's a horrible thing that the nation of Israel has just done to itself. And yet, we're just 11 years from Judaism being completely obsoleted. In this regard, it is also interesting to note that the ephod, the outer garment worn by the priests, was corrupted, according to what we read in Shabat, Judges 8:27. All of Israel played the harlot. They were in love with Baal, the Lord. The Teraphim then suggests that without the Lowy priest serving as the people during Passover and Easter bread and firstborn children, 7 Shabbats, trumpets, reconciliations, and shelters, that there has been no healing in the household of Israel. And while this tragic story indeed has a happy ending, there's no reason to wait. If you are a Israelite, if you are Yehudim, if you are a Jew, why wait? In fact, if you're a Goy, like me, why wait?
Like me.
Yeah. Yahweh's here now, ready, willing to accept children with open arms. It is well past time for God's children to come home, and those who would like to live with them to join them. The means to know Yahweh and engage in the covenant has always been straightforward. Listen to him and then respond accordingly. But this has proven too difficult for most Israelites. This is the next statement. Listen, Shema, good advice, to the word, that's the right thing to focus on, of Yahweh, children of Israel. For it is certain that Yahweh has a dispute and grievance against the inhabitants of the land and earth. This is because there just is no honesty or integrity, no sense of devotion or loyalty. There is no understanding or thoughtful insights pertaining to God in the land and on earth.
Wow.
The first chapter of Hosea is one of the most powerful ever written. And it begins with, you wrote what I said today was the most brilliant letter I've received in years. This time you have given Hosea 4:1 a rousing applause with a wow. But isn't that true? It's a wow.
It is.
Listen to the word of Yahweh, children of Yisrael. What does Yisrael mean? Yisrael has a positive and negative connotation as do so many Hebrew words. It can either be the offspring of those who struggle and contend with God, or it is the individuals who engage and endure with God. Israel is actually named after, Ish means individual and El is God, but the Sarah in the middle in God's story. And it is Sarah who was given the great honor of having her name be the same as Israel, individuals who Sarah El. Shows you what God thought of this woman.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed.
Listen to the words.
Totally different
the
than
statement. Pardon?
I was going to say it's totally different than the religious take on Sarah, who's often depicted as kind of like a shrew. You know?
No,
so it's really beautiful to hear you say that.
The reality is the nasty individual is Abraham. Listen, Abraham is also a great example of keeping it real.
Yeah.
God came to love him. He formed a relationship with him. And I think it's because, well, Abraham was the best available. He was not good. He was not bright. He did a lot of really bad stuff. He pimped his wife out for personal wealth twice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is not an example of a good man. He even claimed that Sarah was his sister, but it's not true.
Yeah.
One of the things that people get confused about. If Sarah was his sister, it'd be incest. That doesn't prove that.
Yep.
No. Sarah was the stepdaughter of Abraham's father.
Yep.
Which means that genetically there was no link between Sarah and Abraham. So it's an important distinction. Now, I understand that Abraham claims otherwise, but Abraham was prone to be dishonest.
Totally.
But the scallywag in the story is Abraham. The heroine is
Sarah.
She is the matriarch of Israel. Really, she's the matriarch of Israel. And that's why Israel bears her name. You know, you don't find Abraham's name in Israel, do you? I understand that I am very critical of Abraham, and God loved the man, and God's choice is a billion times more important than me. I think it has to do largely because Abraham was the only person he could find that was actually walking away from, who was willing to listen to him, and that was enough.
Yeah.
And so, listen to the word of Yahweh, children of Yisrael. And listen, Hoshea's time, there were all different ages, from young to old, and yet he refers to them as children of Israel. And the reason for that is they're his family. They're his people. And so, from his perspective, they are children. And he's the father. And that's the best way to look at God. If you look at God as you're a child, he is your father, you're going to love him. You're not going to be afraid of him. You're going to feel comfortable approaching him. You're going to want to spend time with him. You're going to accept him lifting you up as opposed to you trying to lift him up. And you most certainly will never refer to him as the Lord if you see him as your father. So the children of Israel is an exceedingly important concept for us to grasp. And it says, for it is certain that Yahweh has a dispute and a grievance against the inhabitants of the land and the earth, ha-eretz. Yes, he does. Not even 1 in a million people that knows who he is. This is because there is no honesty or integrity, things that Yahweh values. He did not say there is no faith. He doesn't value faith. He didn't say, I've got a dispute because there's not enough religion. Nope. He didn't say, I've got a dispute because you're just not good enough. Not donating enough money. No. Because you're not all prudes. You know, if you're all prudes, we'd be just fine. No. Because there are not enough rabbis out there. No. Why? Because there is no honesty or an integrity, truth, validity, veracity. What did we heard Kirk and how he analyzed that particular passage, this letter that Dee wrote today. I said it's the best I've received in 5 years. Why? Because it was filled with analysis of somebody taking the time to verify and to expand and find out what more they could learn. This is the trait that Yahweh was looking for. Honest investigation. The search for validity, for truth, veracity, to become certain, to be consistent. That's what was lacking. And it is exceedingly rare today. My wife is trying to gather resources to help teach those searching to get to know Yahweh logic. And the fallacies that are used by religion and politics to mislead people. Because you've got to understand logic and reason if you're going to come to appreciate that God verifies who he is and confirms what he is offering and expecting in return. Then he says, there's no sense of devotion or loyalty. I don't understand that. That's really it's just hard to appreciate. I mean, I know it's a lot, but Yahweh is so wonderful to be around. He doesn't want to be worshipped. He asks almost nothing from us. He's willing to offer us everything. He's entertaining. He is enlightening. He's liberating. He's fun. He's empowering. He's enriching. Why would everyone want to be devoted and loyal?
Not hang out there. Yeah.
Yes, to Yahweh. Then he says there's no understanding or thoughtful insights. This is the thing that began this whole Yada Yahowah series. I wanted to understand. I thought that once you came to know Yada, that you could make the connections to understand, and then you could draw thoughtful insights relative to God and the relationship that he is seeking to form with us. And now, 25 volumes or more later.
How about insights?
Yeah,
wow.
This is what we have. We have now a treasure trove of insights.
Yeah.
And the means to understand Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things he's looking for. Honesty, integrity, a search for the truth, veracity, a willingness to prove the validity of something, resulting in a sense of loyalty and devotion. And all of that leads to understanding, thoughtful insight. That's what God wants more of. Why did he love Dode? Well, there's the answer. Dode scores beyond anyone who has ever lived as it relates to Emeth, as it relates to Chesed, as it relates to Da'at. So I loved him.
That word is why I exclaimed, wow, because if you ask the Jews, who are some of the smartest people on the planet, you know, they have truth, they have insights, they're so devoted in their own thinking. To just look at the scope of when it comes to Yahweh, you have none of these qualities. It's a shocking statement because that's not how they view themselves at all.
Right. Yes, no, you're correct that as a ethnicity, the average IQ of the Jewish race is 15 points higher than humanity at large.
Yeah.
That's significant. I mean, the average IQ is 100, and genius is 130. That would be 1% of the population, and Jews have a 15% or 15-point IQ difference with the rest of humanity. They represent a tiny fraction of 0.2% of the world's population, and they are responsible for about 40% of the world's most important inventions. A very, very intelligent race. And yet, apart from those who have come to know Yahweh through the translations and insights of this particular goy, I don't think there's a Jew on the planet who's used their intellect to figure out who Yahweh is and what he's offering, what he expects in return.
Guarantee it.
So there is this chasm that has affected Jews' willingness to apply their intellect to where it matters. The word of Yahweh, unfiltered by the religious, the rabbis, or anyone else. Now, I can understand if you're an agnostic Jew and you say, religion's full of it. Why would I want to pay any attention to that? I agree with you. So does God. But his testimony is not religious. Consider what he has to say. And come to know him not on faith, not through religion. Come to know him through an honest investigation. Come to develop a loyal and devoted relationship with him. And it's easy to do. Listen to what he has to say.
Yes, it is.
Go where his words lead. Go ahead, Dee.
No, I was agreeing with you. It really is a lot easier than people think.
It isn't. Listen, I'm not going to pretend like it's easy because God particularly made it such that it wouldn't be easy. That sounds contrary to what you've probably been told. God does not want to save everyone, and he doesn't want knowing him to be easy. God loves honest work. He values when we are devoted enough to knowing him that we're willing to be observant, to listen, to do the work that's required to know who he is and appreciate what he's offering and asking in return. For 22 years. I do it 8 to 12 hours a day, 6 and 7 days a week. I don't do it out of a sense of obligation, but out of a sense of adventure, of loyalty, of excitement. It's exceedingly rewarding. God values that.
Yeah.
And the reward is probably more insights than any one person has developed from the Word of God. Well, certainly in the last 2,000 years, probably in the past 3,000 years.
I'm not sure it's not the most, because they couldn't understand a lot of the things that we know because of a scientific world, like energy-based things and
yes, I think it's true. Yeah, I think it's true. I think
so. They couldn't
Moshe,
be.
Moshe
this
and
is the
Dode
prime time.
Yeah, we're much brighter and much more in tune with everything that Yahweh has to offer. They're the best of the best. But Moshe was chosen because he understood the religion, the politics, the caste system of Mitzrayim, and had not only rejected it, but was willing to risk his life to protect people from it. That's why Moshe was chosen. Moshe was not chosen because he had a PhD in astronomy and understood biology and human history and all the other kinds of things that help us form these insights. You know, E equals MC2, and why that matters was something way beyond him. Relativity, as it relates to the dimension of time, was way beyond him. But it isn't beyond us. Dode, spectacular writer and orator, wonderful leader, courageous man, passionate. I mean, I just think of Dode as the ultimate leader. Walks into the room and everybody goes, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. That's Dode. Whoa. Yeah. Okay. Is he going to sing to us tonight? What? Yeah. That's extraordinary. But what we have is so far beyond what they had. Dode wrote Proverbs about the beauty of living in a family with Yahowah. Dode wrote Mizmor songs about what his relationship was like with Yahowah and how that would play out over the chasm of time. But if you combine that and their understanding of the Torah with a full appreciation of Dode's life, and then add to it prophets like Yeshayah, Yirmiyah, Zechariah, Malachi, Hosea, then you are enriched further. And then you add the perspective of being able to see the whole story unfold and watch us go headlong into this future that Yahowah has devoted so much prophetic ink to describing. And you see that whole picture, and then you have the benefit of archaeology and the benefit of science, and can validate what Yahowah has said, and can appreciate, for example, the creation account. Neither Moshe or Dode had any ability to recognize the relative nature of time, and that it does not flow the same for all viewers, and that it is affected by both velocity and by mass, significantly by those things. I said I created the Earth in 6 24-hour days. They would have no way of knowing that was 14 or 15 billion years. And that 14 to 15 billion years from Yahowah's perspective at the point of creation, that relative view in the presence of great velocity and matter happens to be exactly 6 24-hour days from our perspective here on Earth, which, by the way, didn't exist at the time.
Yep.
And we know that because of the cosmic radiation background, which is where the waves are stretched to 10 to the 12th power. You take 14 billion years and you divide them by 10 to the 12th, you get 6 24-hour days. There aren't different times at the same time. They had no concept of that, and yet we do.
Right.
And I think if you had asked either of them to explain when Dode is going to return, they could have done it. But we see the whole pageant played out right before our eyes, and it becomes exceedingly easy to do it. So yes, there are more insights presented in the volumes of Yada Yahowah than maybe ever in human history, because we share all of the wonderful insights that Moshe conveyed, all the wonderful insights that Dode conveyed, all of the wonderful insights of the prophets, and then we put them together to have so many more and to make it applicable to our time and to both Yehudim and Goyim today.
Yes.
And through them, you'll come to know who Yahweh is and what he's offering, what he's expecting in return. And you'll be so surprised that he never asked you to pray to him. He never asked you to bow down to him. He never asked you to worship him. He doesn't ask you to give him anything. 5 things. 5 and 5. How many fingers do you have on your hand? Oh, 5 of them. Pretty easy to remember. How about the other hand? Well, 5 of those. Okay. 5 requests, 5 benefits. Exceedingly simple. First of those we've already talked about. What's the lone prerequisite for being part of the covenant?
Yeah, walk away.
Walk away from your country. Walk away from your culture. Walk away from your father's house. So until you do that, until you forego religion and politics and show a willingness to stop trusting in those things and recognizing that they are false, that they lead you away from God, that's the first thing you have to do. That's a prerequisite. Everybody that Yahweh engaged and put to work and worked through had taken that first step. The second is that God wants us to walk to him and become perfected. Now, you might say, well, you can't be perfect, and you just said you're dented and flawed. What do you mean? He didn't say that we're supposed to be perfect, but be perfected. God created the means. What is the means to be perfected? Now, this is really a tough one for most people because neither Jews nor Christians know the answer. Read the same book, don't know the answer. Yeah. Perfection does not come from Passover, from the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. That's eternal life. That can be either a really good thing or a really bad thing, depending on with whom you're spending it and where you're going to spend it. Perfection is matzah, the very thing that religious Jews no longer celebrate, the thing that, well, Christians got no clue. You go from their corrupted perversion of Pesach to Bikurim and have no thought whatsoever as to what unyeasted bread was all about. But unyeasted bread is the means that God has to perfect us. It removes the fungus of sin, the fungus of religion and politics from our soul. That's how God perfects us. Walk to me and become perfected. The doorway is Pesach. The threshold into God's home is matzah, where we're perfected. It's the first step. He gets you done right off the bat. The next thing that God requests of us, by the way, those first 2 requests, pretty much in our interest. The third thing he requests us is to trust and rely upon me. Rather than trusting your religion and relying on your religion or your political party or your military or some other thing, come to trust and rely on Yahweh. I have, you have, you should. Trust and rely on Yahweh. It doesn't say believe in him. It doesn't say pray to him. It doesn't say worship. It doesn't say be devoted. Just trust and rely upon him. To do that, of course, you have to come to know him, and you have to know who he is and what he is offering if you're going to trust and rely on somebody. You can walk across a bridge without trusting and relying on it, but if you're going to actually understand why it's trustworthy and you should rely on it, you need to know how that bridge was built and likely even who built it and out of what. Well, that story is told in the Torah and Prophets. The fourth requirement that God asks is to closely examine and carefully consider the mitzvah. I've been translating, as I shared, Ezekiel. He is really big into the mitzvot, which are, it's a means to exercise good judgment, but it's typically just decisions. And he is really big into the choke, which would be prescriptions for living. But the thing that makes you right with God is the mitzvah. It's the terms and conditions of the covenant. It is the instructions that God provided on what he's offering and what he's expecting in return. And God says, observe those. Closely examine and carefully consider. You do that, you'll be able to trust and rely on him. You do that, you'll walk to him, become perfect. And, of course, the prerequisite, you've already walked away. The fifth condition we've already talked about, the sign of the covenant. Men should be circumcised, and as parents, we circumcise our sons on the 8th day so that we remember to raise them as part of Yahweh's family. 5 conditions. There are 5 benefits. Those 5 benefits are provided through our attendance at the first 4 Moed Mikre, the 4 Moed Mikre that were fulfilled in year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. They are Pesach, which opens the doorway to life, Matzah, which perfects our souls, removing the fungus of religion and politics from them. God's not worried about individual sin. You know, you thought wild and crazy thoughts of Mary Lou as she walked down the street. Doesn't care. You thought, boy, it would really be nice to live in that guy's house. Coveting it, doesn't care. Really just doesn't care. What he cares about is your relationship with him and your willingness to forego a relationship with false gods. So, the first step, Pesach, opens the doorway to life. Matzah, he scrubbed your soul of the things that matter, the things that really stain it, religion and politics. And then on Bokurim, firstborn children, you're adopted into his family, becoming children of the living God. Such that 7 sevens later, 49 days from Bokurim, 50 days from Matzah, is Shabuah, where we are enriched, we are empowered, we're enlightened by God. These are the first 4 Moed Mikre. They were fulfilled in the year 4000 Yah. The next Moed Mikre to be fulfilled is Towrah. To a very large extent, and maybe to the most important extent, it is being fulfilled in your listening. In 2001, 32 years before Yahweh would return with Dode, he asked me to join him in this mission on Towrah. We are Towrahing on this program. That is what we're about. That is, Towrah is the sum total of the 25 volumes you'll find at YadaYah.com. We are the living embodiment of what he wanted done with Towrah, where you call out a warning to his people, telling them that religion and politics are deadly, mistaken, and they're leading them astray, while at the same time you're sharing the message that we are conveying about the covenant, about the Moed Mikre, about Yahweh's name, and about him calling us home. This is followed by the single most important day in the history of the universe. Second chance for God's people. Kapurim, reconciliations. It is when Yahweh Dode will be returning in 2033, October 2nd, at sundown in Jerusalem. It is not a day of affliction, not a day for twirling chickens over your head. It's not a high holy day. It is simply a day where God's wayward children, no longer religious, look up to Yahweh, recognize him by name, acknowledge his name, know his name, celebrate his name, appreciate these terms and conditions of the covenant, appreciate what he is offering us in return, have answered the invitation for the Moed Mikre, and are there waiting for him, along with Dode. Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations, which leads 5 days later to Sukkah, because God's story is that he conceived us as humans in the Garden of Eden, a perfect place of wonderful fellowship where we were together. And he's returning us to the Garden of Eden. Sukkah is where we camp out with Yahweh for 1,000 years, here on earth as he lives with us on this planet. Sukkah, the return to Eden. That is his story. He's inviting you to participate. And we invite you to listen in again this time next week as we pursue what I think is the most important chapter in all of the prophets, Hosea chapter 4. We'll return again to the first verse of it and then move on from there. May Yahweh bless. Have a wonderful evening and day tomorrow with Yahweh. I view that Shabbat is not a day to do nothing. Shabbat is a word, is a verb, and it is Yahweh. It's the best day of the week. May Yah bless you all.
Absolutely.
All right.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.